The day Ethan left wasn't stormy or dramatic. There was no shouting, no suitcase thrown down the stairs, no neighbors watching from behind curtains. Just silence. Marlene Harper stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing a chipped mug she'd had since nursing school. The window in front of her framed their backyard, the old oak tree swaying slightly in the early spring wind. Daffodils she planted last year were starting to bloom near the edge of the fence line. She felt it before he even said a word. Ethan entered the kitchen with his usual heavy step boots still dusted with dry mud from the job site. He set down his phone on the counter and didn't say good morning. That was the first sign. Marlene reached for a dish towel and glanced at him, something tight curling in her chest. She hadn't slept well again, not because of anything in particular, but because she'd been feeling something shift between them for months now. No fights, no affair, at least none she could prove, just absence. Absence in his voice, in his eyes, in the way he no longer waited for her to sit at the table before eating. He cleared his throat. "I think we need to talk." Her hands stilled on the wet ceramic. She didn't turn around. She knew that tone. It wasn't nervous. It was rehearsed. "You know what day it is, Ethan?" she said softly, still facing the window. Silence, then Tuesday. She turned. "It's the day my mother died, 3 years ago." His eyes dropped, not out of grief, out of guilt. "I forgot," he muttered. Of course he did. But that wasn't what he came to say. He sat down at the table, the one they bought from a farmer's market the year their daughter turned 10, and slid an envelope across the surface like it was a receipt, not a declaration. "I've met someone," he said, not even pretending to cushion the blow. Marlene blinked. "You've..." "What?" "I've met someone. It's been a few months. Her name's Cassidy. She's..." "I know who Cassidy is." Her voice didn't rise. It narrowed. Cassidy. The 29-year-old intern who shadowed Marlene during hospital outreach events. The same girl who came to their house one summer evening and complimented Marlene's lasagna. The same girl who'd once said, "You two seem so solid. I hope I have what you have someday." "I'm not trying to hurt you," Ethan added, voice low. "Then you should have left before you started touching what wasn't yours." He flinched, but only slightly. No protest, no defense. "I want the house," he said after a beat. "It makes the most sense. You don't need something this big by yourself." Marlene looked at him, then really looked. "You want my home," she repeated. He paused. "Our home." But she shook her head slowly. "I built this house. I laid out every tile. I chose the land. I worked double night shifts while you were getting your business off the ground just to afford the down payment. I know, but Cassidy and I, she's moving in. We want to start over clean slate." "Here?" she asked, stunned. "You want to start over?" "Here?" He avoided her eyes. "It's familiar. She likes the garden." Marlene exhaled laughter, catching in her throat like a sob that took the wrong turn. "I planted that garden while you were in physical therapy. You couldn't bend over without wincing, remember? She's not trying to replace you," he said quickly, as if that made things better. "She doesn't have to try. You've already handed her the blueprints." She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She sat down, smoothed the envelope on the table, and read the first few lines. Divorce papers, standard, clean. Like their life had been a business transaction and the returns just didn't justify the investment anymore. "I'm 54, Ethan," she said, voice low. "I gave you 30 years of my life. I nursed your father while he was dying. I gave up my career when Jess was born. I went through menopause in silence while you played golf with your brother every weekend." He didn't speak. "I am not an empty house you get to repaint and redecorate just because you're bored." Still, he didn't speak. So she stood. "Take your coat," she said, "and your boots, and get out of my kitchen." He looked up, then startled. "Marlene." "I'll sign the papers," she interrupted. "But not today. Today I'm going to make soup and sit on the porch swing I built by hand. And tomorrow I'll figure out how to remove your name from the utility bills." He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. As he left, Marlene didn't watch him. She didn't need to. She already knew what a man looked like when he walked out of something he never truly valued. The screen door creaked shut. She stood in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by memories, wearing fresh coats of betrayal. Then she poured herself another cup of coffee and whispered to herself, "They always think we'll break quietly, but some of us don't break. We rebuild." Outside, the wind carried the scent of blooming daffodils. and inside a fire had begun. Marlene hadn't opened the cedar chest in her closet for nearly 7 years. It was the kind of thing you forget about until life throws you a reason to remember. After Ethan left, she moved like a woman underwater, slow, deliberate, detached. She boxed his remaining clothes, canceled his subscription to the Woodworker's Journal, and vacuumed under the bed even though she didn't need to. It wasn't about cleanliness. It was about reclaiming space. The house still smelled like him, though, like sawdust and pine, the scent of old ambition and half-finished projects. Cassidy hadn't moved in yet, thank God, but Marlene knew it was only a matter of time. Ethan said she wanted to ease into things as if the life he'd bulldozed over was a pair of shoes she needed to break in. That morning, while sorting through their joint files, tax returns, retirement forms, and other paper ghosts, Marlene found the spare key to their safety deposit box. She paused. Most of their important documents had long since been digitized, filed away in Ethan's cloud storage password, protected naturally. But the safety deposit box was hers, opened in her name, funded by her mother's small inheritance. He'd never shown interest in it. She grabbed her coat keys and the last shred of certainty she had left and headed to the bank. The box was cold, not literally, but metaphorically like a sealed room in an old house that holds the temperature of memory. Inside were a few things that made her smile: a faded photo of her mother holding Jess as a baby, a locket with her wedding photo inside, and a stack of her nursing credentials. Beneath it all, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was a document with thick paper and ornate lettering: the deed to the house. She pulled it out slowly, like she was unearthing a secret someone had buried too shallow. Her name was the only one on it. She read it 3 times, then once more, just to be sure. Ethan's name had never been added. They'd bought the land together, yes, but the down payment had come from her mother's inheritance. Back then, Ethan's credit had been shaky, so everything had gone through her. He said they'd fix it later. They never did. She blinked slowly. For a long time, she just sat there in the little cubicle at the back of the vault room, holding that paper like it was a torch. Because maybe it was. That night, Marlene didn't sleep. Not because of grief, but because of clarity. She sat on the living room floor with the deed on one side of her and a yellow legal pad on the other. She started writing. A list. Cassidy's name not on any utilities. Ethan's name not on the mortgage. Legal options, call Grace her sister. Do I even want the house? That last question stuck with her. Did she? The home had been her sanctuary once. She picked the pale green siding, the bay window in the kitchen, the clawfoot tub Ethan never liked, because it was too vintage. She hung wind chimes near the porch and planted wisteria along the fence. She had bled into every corner of this home, and now it was about to be colonized by someone who had called her ma'am just a few years ago. Marlene stood up, smoothed the front of her robe, and walked to the pantry. She pulled out a loose floorboard behind the stacked jars of jam. There, taped beneath the baseboard, was a flash drive and a manila envelope. Her insurance policy. Figuratively and literally. She had kept records of bank transfers, receipts, her medical contributions, her caregiving time while Ethan was recovering from back surgery, every unpaid hour, every sacrifice promotion, every email Cassidy had ever sent her from her intern days. Marlene hadn't built her life on naivety. She'd just been too tired to use her wisdom. Until now. The next morning, she made 2 phone calls. First to Grace. Her sister didn't answer on the first try, but when she called back and heard the situation, she went quiet on the line. "Marlene," she said, finally, "are you sure you want to fight?" Marlene exhaled. "I don't want to fight," she said. "I want to be heard." Grace understood. The second call was to a local women's legal center. She didn't know why she called them exactly. Maybe just to ask questions. Maybe just to feel less alone. A woman named Althea picked up. When Marlene briefly explained her situation, Althea said, "Would you like to come in for a free consultation, even if you're not filing anything yet?" "I might be," Marlene said, voice steadier than she expected. "I'll book you for Monday at 11. That weekend, she saw Cassidy's car parked in the driveway. It was a shiny silver SUV with a dream catcher hanging from the mirror. Marlene watched from the upstairs window as the younger woman walked toward the porch phone, in one hand, Starbucks in the other. She didn't knock, just used the keypad Ethan had installed last year. Of course, she had the code. She belonged now. Marlene watched her vanish inside. And instead of crying, she opened the window slightly, just enough to let in the spring air. The daffodils were blooming faster now, and somewhere beneath the floorboards, a storm was gathering. Marlene waited until Wednesday, not out of hesitation, but calculation. Cassidy had posted an Instagram story that morning, which her niece sent her. A clip of fresh roses on the dining table and the caption, "First dinner in our forever home. New beginnings blessed. Forever." Marlene scoffed softly when she saw it. There was something almost innocent in the delusion, as if hashtags could hold up walls, as if a digital scrapbook could overwrite decades of foundation. But she let it sit. Then around 10:15 a.m., she packed a box. Not much. Just a few family photo albums, a quilt her grandmother had made, and a mug that read, "Strong women raise strong women." She tucked a copy of the email Cassidy sent her on Monday into the outer pocket of her handbag. "Dear Marlene, please make arrangements to collect your remaining personal items. We'd appreciate mornings only, preferably with prior notice. Cassidy. P.S. Please respect boundaries." Boundaries. Marlene smiled, not the warm kind, but the kind you wear like armor. She drove slowly. Windows down. A soft gospel tune playing low on the radio. No drama, no rage. Just the quiet assurance of a woman holding the deed. The neighborhood looked the same, though it felt different now. Trees, blooming sprinklers, humming the gentle rhythm of a Wednesday morning in suburbia. But the house, her house, stood like a theater prop under a new director. Trimmed hedges, Cassidy's SUV in the drive, and an unfamiliar wind chime hanging from the porch. But the lock hadn't changed. Of course it hadn't. She slid the key in like she always had, twist, push, enter. And just like that, she was home. The silence inside hit differently. Not the peaceful kind she'd once nurtured, but a curated quiet. Furniture had been shifted. Her mother's antique mirror was gone, replaced by something modern and gold-trimmed. The air smelled like lavender candles and entitlement. She stood there a moment, just breathing. And then, like she owned the place, which she technically still did, she stepped fully into the living room. Everything looked dressed up. Same bones, but new skin. The kind of cosmetic change that tried to erase memories without demolishing the structure. Framed Pinterest quotes now hung where family portraits once did. Good vibes only. Love wins. The universe has your back. It would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. In the kitchen, the spice rack she'd built was gone. The mason jar that once held her chamomile tea bags now held organic protein bars. Her ceramic bread bin, the one she bought with her first paycheck as a nurse, was missing. Gone. Or packed away, or discarded. She felt her chest tighten, but it wasn't grief, it was grit. Then came footsteps. Cassidy appeared at the top of the stairs wearing Ethan's old sweatshirt, the same one Marlene used to wear on cold nights after long shifts. The sleeves were too long for her. She looked like a child playing house. Cassidy froze when she saw her. Marlene. Marlene offered a small smile. "Morning, got your note." You're supposed to call first." Cassidy stammered, descending 2 steps. "I didn't realize I needed permission to enter my own home," Marlene replied casually, walking into the dining room. "You're not supposed to be here like this," Cassidy said a little sharper now. "We have boundaries. This is inappropriate." Marlene placed the quilt box gently on a chair. "Sweetheart," she said, voice smooth as warm honey, "as long as my name is still on this house, I'll come and go as I please." Cassidy flushed. "You should have texted," she snapped. "I don't owe you a text, and you don't owe me attitude. Let's keep it courteous, shall we?" Cassidy crossed her arms tightly. "Greg will hear about this." "Good," Marlene said. "He should have been the one to greet me." Marlene moved through the house room by room slowly, deliberately. She didn't touch much. She didn't have to. Just her presence was enough to rattle the furniture. Upstairs, her old bedroom had been repainted a soft peach. The comforter was floral now, with matching throw pillows staged like a catalog. She picked up a photo frame from the nightstand. Cassidy and Ethan at the beach, wind in their hair, smiles wide. She set it down with care. No comment, just quiet observation. When she came back downstairs, Cassidy was waiting by the front door. "You've made your point," Cassidy said, trying to sound poised but coming off small. Point. Marlene blinked slowly. "I'm just following your instructions." "You don't have to be dramatic." Darling, Marlene said, slipping the envelope into her bag, this isn't drama. This is documentation. Cassidy's jaw tensed. You think you're the victim. No, Marlene replied calmly. I think I'm the co-owner. That stopped Cassidy cold. What? You didn't know? Marlene raised an eyebrow. I still hold legal ownership of this property. Ethan never changed the deed. That can't be true, he said. He says a lot of things. Cassidy's face faltered. It wasn't rage now. It was fear. Real creeping fear. Marlene stepped toward the door. Tell Ethan I stopped by, she said, and tell him to start reading the fine print. Outside, the wind felt different, like it had shifted direction just for her. Marlene sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply took off her wedding ring and dropped it into the glove box like spare change. Then she smiled. Because Cassidy may have had the key code, but Marlene, she had the keys. Ethan called that evening, not to apologize, not to check in, just to scold. Marlene, what were you thinking? Cassidy said you barged into the house like a homeowner, she offered calmly. He faltered. You should have scheduled. There are rules. Rules, she repeated, savoring the word like it was a flavor she hadn't tasted in years. Interesting how everyone suddenly wants structure after breaking all the ones I lived by. I'm trying to keep things civil. You're trying to stay comfortable, she said. There's a difference. He went quiet, long enough that she thought he might hang up. But then came the familiar sound of manufactured concern. This isn't good for you, Mar. All this hostility? You're making it harder than it has to be. Marlene leaned back in her chair, the phone pressed loosely to her ear. I raised a daughter, buried a mother, cared for your father, and built a home while you were off reinventing yourself. Don't lecture me about hard. Marlene, I'm not being hostile, she added. I'm being strategic. Click. He hung up. Grace arrived 2 days later with a briefcase and a bottle of wine. I brought both, she said, holding them up like trophies. Depending on how tonight goes, we'll need one or the other. They sat at Marlene's kitchen table, the one Ethan never liked, because it was too narrow. Now it felt just right. Between sips of wine and the flipping of folders, Grace laid it all out. You've got two options, she said. One, force a partition sale. Two, make him buy you out. He doesn't have the money. Then he has 60 days to find it. Or you take the house to market. Marlene nodded slowly. And Cassidy? What about her? She's squatting on something that doesn't belong to her. Grace gave a wry smile. Don't worry, she'll feel the earthquake before the walls fall. That night, Marlene drafted a letter. It wasn't emotional. No accusations, no guilt trips, just the facts. To Ethan Harper. As per the current deed and title, I remain a legal co-owner of the property located at 1146 Ridgemont Lane. You have 60 days from receipt of this letter to either submit an offer for my share, vacate the property for court-ordered sale. This is not a threat, it's a procedure. Kindly direct future communication through my attorney, Grace H. Benton. She printed it on thick paper, the kind that weighed more than it should, like justice. The next ripple came on Monday. Cassidy posted a vague story, a boomerang of her standing in the kitchen captioned, "When people try to steal your peace, but you've got sage and a good lawyer." Marlene didn't respond. She didn't even flinch. She just took a walk around her block, humming under her breath, letting the wind lift the edge of her scarf like a flag. Let them light sage. She was lighting paperwork. 2 weeks later, Ethan called again, this time from a different number. Marlene, I got the letter. And you're really going to do this? You thought I'd fold quietly. I thought you were better than this. She paused. I am better than this. That's why I'm not yelling. I'm not fighting. I'm just following the law. A sigh, deep, tired, performative. You're going to ruin everything. No, Ethan, I'm going to reclaim it. The official court notice was filed on April 17th. Cassidy stopped posting by April 18th, and by April 20th, the silence from their end was louder than any insult. Marlene didn't celebrate, not yet, but she did pull out the good dishes. She made chicken soup from scratch and ate it in silent spoon, scraping against the porcelain bowl like a quiet drum roll. She didn't need a war. She had a lawyer. She had a deed. She had time. The first sign of panic wasn't the angry phone call. It was the silence. Marlene didn't hear from Ethan for a full week after the court papers landed in their mailbox. No texts, no passive-aggressive voicemails, no Cassidy-filtered emails filled with faux positivity. Just nothing. She knew the silence wasn't peace. It was strategy. Or maybe it was shock. On the 8th day, her lawyer Grace forwarded her an email Ethan's attorney had sent. It was short and frantic, lacking the polish of someone used to being on defense. Our clients request an informal negotiation prior to sale proceedings. They believe a mutual agreement may still be reached to avoid further legal involvement. Marlene smiled as she read it, not out of joy but recognition. Ethan was flailing, and Cassidy, probably screaming into a pillow that she'd fluffed just last week, thinking it was hers forever. Later that day, Marlene went to the market. She ran into Mrs. Ellison from the old book club, still wearing that same perfume and that same half-curious tone. "I heard about the situation," she said gently. Marlene tilted her head. "What situation?" "You know, with Ethan and the new arrangement." Marlene held her gaze for a long, quiet moment. Then she placed her basket down and replied softly, "There's no situation, just restoration." Mrs. Ellison blinked. Marlene walked away. By week 2, the cracks had grown visible. Darius, her daughter Jess's fiancé, called out of the blue. "I didn't want to get in the middle," he said. "You already are," Marlene replied, calm but not cold. Ethan called me. He's freaking out. Says you're trying to bankrupt him." "Did he mention the affair?" A pause. "No." "Did he mention moving someone into my home before our divorce was finalized?" "No." "Then he's not freaking out about bankruptcy, Darius. He's freaking out because I'm not letting him win." The line went quiet. Darius finally said, "Jess always said you were strong." Marlene smiled faintly. She didn't know the half of it. The next morning, a large bouquet appeared at Marlene's door. White roses, her favorite once. No card, no name, just a delivery slip with Ethan's handwriting in the signature field. She placed the bouquet in the sink. Didn't even bother with a vase. White roses can't cover red flags. 2 days later, Cassidy broke the silence. Not through flowers, not through texts. She showed up. Marlene had just returned from her weekly library volunteer shift, groceries in hand, when Cassidy stepped onto her porch. Hair curled too tightly, makeup done too heavily, smile stretched too thin. "Hi," she said, like this was a neighborly drop-in. Marlene stared at her. Cassidy cleared her throat. "I wanted to talk. About the house." Marlene set her grocery bag down. What part of direct all communication through my attorney was unclear. Cassidy flinched, then pushed on. "Look, I know this is hard for you, but you're being kind of spiteful." Marlene tilted her head. "Is that what you think this is?" Cassidy shrugged. "You're tearing down something beautiful out of resentment." Marlene laughed low and rich. "Beautiful Cassidy, you're living in a borrowed dream and calling it yours. You're bitter." "No, I'm deliberate." Cassidy took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You can't honestly think you'll win this." Marlene stepped forward, too closer, eye level, unblinking. "I already have." And she shut the door in Cassidy's face. That night, Marlene sat on her couch, wrapped in the quilt her grandmother made. She lit a single candle, not for them, but for herself. Because this wasn't revenge. It was rebalance. And sometimes the sharpest blades aren't forged in fire. They're written on paper. By the 3rd week, the facade of their new beginning had begun to rot at the edges. Marlene didn't need to spy to know things were unraveling. She simply listened. People talk when they think you're no longer part of the story. At the corner bakery, she overheard someone mention Ethan arguing with a woman in the parking lot, loud enough that a passerby asked if they needed help. At the church potluck, Mrs. Langley whispered that Cassidy had stormed out of the nail salon mid-manicure, muttering something about betrayal and court dates. Even Darius sent her a message, just a short text that read, "Dad's not doing great. Cassidy's threatening to leave. Said the stress is messing up her skin." Marlene didn't reply. She didn't need to. But the real shift came on a Thursday afternoon when Ethan called again. This time his voice was thin, stretched, like a man trying to sound taller over the phone. "I think we should talk." "You mean negotiate?" "I just think we can settle this like adults." "I already am," she said. Quietly, legally, effectively. He exhaled like a deflating balloon. You don't have to make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not making it hard, Ethan. I'm making it equal. There was a pause. Then the real reason surfaced. We can't buy you out. Marlene waited. We tried. Cassidy talked to her uncle about a loan, but your entire life is built on a house you don't actually own. Silence. She let it hang. Then she said, "You thought I'd disappear." I know. I used to think that too. Click. Another hang-up. Another confirmation. That evening, Marlene poured herself a glass of wine and stared at the framed photo of her daughter Jess on the bookshelf. She thought of all the times she bit her tongue in that house, times she stepped around Ethan's temper or tucked away her opinion because he'd had a long day. All the moments she made herself small so someone else could feel tall. And then she remembered the look in Cassidy's eyes when the front door had closed between them. Fear, not of Marlene, but of consequence. It was intoxicating. Not because she wanted anyone to suffer, but because it reminded her she was no longer invisible. The next morning, Grace called with news. The judge has approved the partition. Marlene sat very still. It's official now, Grace said. They have 60 days. After that, the house goes on the market. Marlene closed her eyes, not in disbelief. In gratitude. Not everyone gets to outgrow their trauma in the same room it happened. But she had. She took a walk to the house that afternoon. She didn't go inside, just stood across the street watching. The curtains were closed. The porch light flickered. A stack of mail sat ignored in the box, one envelope unmistakably from the county clerk's office. The lawn had begun to yellow near the edges. Decay didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispered. That evening, she got a text from Ethan. "Can we at least talk about the staging?" She didn't respond. He tried again the next day. "Cassidy's feeling really exposed right now. Could you please not remove everything?" Marlene stared at the screen. So now Cassidy felt exposed. She wasn't exposed when she wore Ethan's t-shirt and mocked Marlene in her own hallway. She wasn't exposed when she sent letters demanding boundaries. But now that reality was seeping through the floorboards, exposure was a problem. Marlene took a breath and forwarded the message to Grace. Let the lawyer handle the noise. Marlene had already found her silence, and in it power. The invitation came through Grace. Strictly procedural, Ethan's lawyer said, a scheduled time for Marlene to collect her remaining belongings before staging began, Cassidy insisted. Marlene didn't care what Cassidy insisted, but she agreed, not out of obligation, out of curiosity. She arrived at 11:00 a.m. sharp. No need to knock, she still had the key. She walked up the front steps of what used to be her porch. The wood now painted a sterile gray strip of the character she'd stained in herself years ago. The wind chimes were gone. So were the potted mums she used to rotate seasonally. The welcome mat had been replaced with one that read, "Live, laugh, love." Marlene stepped over it like a landmine. Inside it was too quiet. No music, no laughter, just the sound of a house pretending to be whole. Cassidy wasn't there, but Ethan was. He stood near the dining table, dressed like he'd just come from work, but still trying too hard, shirt tucked in hair-gelled back cologne too thick. The table was already set. 2 place settings, soup warming in a pot on the stove. Marlene blinked. What is this? I figured you might be hungry, Ethan said, trying for casual. She looked around, the absurdity of it all. You're trying to stall, she said. You think if you play nice, I'll forget. He pulled out a chair. I just want to talk. I gave you 27 years to talk. Marlene, please. She didn't sit. Instead, she walked to the hallway closet and retrieved the last of her boxes. A few photo albums, a wrapped canvas her daughter painted in 6th grade, and an old pair of slippers she almost left behind. Ethan followed her to the living room. You really won't reconsider. She turned to him slowly. I already have. That's why we're here. He rubbed the back of his neck, that nervous habit he always had when things slipped out of his control. Cassidy's not handling this well. She was never built for storms, Marlene said. Only sunshine. He sighed. We were happy. She tilted her head. No. You were distracted. There's a difference. He looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Because he didn't. He still expected the woman who'd once cried when he forgot their anniversary. The woman who cooked Thanksgiving dinner alone while he watched football. The woman who smiled through disappointment because she thought love required endurance. But that woman had left the house months before her body did. Marlene walked to the kitchen where her teacup still sat on the back shelf behind rows of artisanal syrups Cassidy had no doubt arranged. She picked it up gently, held it like a relic. You know, she said, not turning to face him, this isn't about revenge. Then what is it about? Ownership. He paused. Of the house. No, she said, finally turning. Of myself. On her way out, she paused by the dining table. 2 plates, 2 wine glasses, 2 forks resting perfectly parallel. She placed her teacup down in the center. Use this, she said. It's the last thing I'll ever give you. Ethan blinked. You're really gonna sell? She looked around one last time, not with sorrow, but with detachment. This place deserves laughter again, she said. Real laughter. Not the kind forced through pretty teeth and filtered stories. He didn't reply. And for once, Marlene didn't wait for him to. She left the house as quietly as she had entered. But this time she wasn't leaving something behind. She was reclaiming space and finally making room for herself. The ruling came on a Monday. Clean, undeniable, permanent. The judge upheld the partition. Unless Ethan could afford to buy out Marlene's half at fair market value, the house would be sold through a court-appointed agent at a price determined by appraisal. No backdoor deals, no under-the-table handoffs to friends or family, no lowball offers from Cassidy's cousin who flips homes as a side hustle. Just business. Just justice. Grace called Marlene as she sat in her garden tending to her hydrangeas. It's official, she said. 60 days. After that, the house is listed. Marlene didn't smile. Not yet. Instead, she pressed her hand to the soil and whispered, "Let it grow." The fallout came fast. The next day, the for sale by owner sign went up in front of the house. Ethan, trying to get ahead of the storm, trying to cut corners, save face, avoid the slow humiliation of losing control in public. But Grace shut that down within hours. The court order required licensed representation. No shortcuts, she told Ethan's lawyer. If they want out, they'll have to walk through every single door they opened. Marlene didn't see the inside of that house again. She didn't need to. She let Grace and the real estate agent handle everything, the staging, the showings, the negotiations. She remained out of sight, but very much in charge. Ethan texted her once, "Please don't remove everything. Cassidy feels really exposed." She stared at the message, unreadable expression on her face. Then she passed it to Grace. Let them squirm. Let them feel the draft of a life built on a lie. Cassidy vanished from social media a few weeks later. Her last post, a blurry photo of a sunset with a caption that read, "Some people will never understand growth, but I'm choosing peace." Peace. Funny how the people who cause the most chaos are always the first to claim they're victims of someone else's storm. Then the real offer came in. Full asking price. No contingencies. A young couple, first-time homebuyers expecting their first child. They loved the garden, the bay windows, the feeling that the home had good bones. Grace called Marlene immediately. They want to move fast. 2-week close. Marlene looked at her calendar. The date felt ordinary, but what it held was extraordinary. "Perfect," she said. "Let's move." Ethan called again. Not to fight this time, not even to negotiate. To beg. "Elaine," he said softly. First time he'd used her full name in years. "This is vindictive. You're leaving us with nothing." She didn't respond right away. She sipped her tea, waited, then said, "You built your new life in a house that didn't belong to you. Now it's time to leave the way you came in with nothing." He tried to soften. "You don't need the money like we do." "That's the first true thing you've said. I don't need the money. I need the silence." Click. She hung up. The day of the final walkthrough, Marlene stayed away. She was at her new place, a modest but bright 2-bedroom condo with no shared mortgage, no joint utilities, no overlapping toothbrushes. The sun poured through the windows like affirmation. A fresh start, on her terms. She lit a candle. Not for memory, not for grief, but for gratitude. And when Grace called to confirm that the buyers had signed the funds were wired and Ethan and Cassidy had officially vacated, Marlene simply said thank you. That evening, she found a small package at her door. From Grace. inside a mug that read, "Unbothered, unbent, unbreakable," and below it, a handwritten note. "You didn't just win a case, Mar, you reclaimed your space." Marlene held the mug in her hands and laughed, not bitter, not cruel, joyful, free. Marlene didn't throw a party. She didn't post online. She didn't toast champagne. She didn't broadcast her win. Instead, she bought herself a bookshelf, simple solid oak. She filled it with the things she hadn't made room for in years: her nursing textbooks, her daughter's framed childhood drawings, a worn copy of The Color Purple with notes in the margins. She added her grandmother's locket, her mother's pie recipe on yellowed index cards, and the mug from Grace that said unbothered, unbent, unbreakable. This wasn't a trophy case. It was a reminder that she didn't just survive. She rebuilt. A week after the house sale closed, Jess called. They hadn't spoken much since the divorce, not because of anger, but because of distance. Jess had tried to stay neutral, floating in that polite purgatory. Children sometimes get stuck in between divorcing parents. But now, something was different. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice softer than usual. "I heard from Darius about the sale, about everything." Marlene sat on her balcony, a pot of chamomile beside her, the sunset catching in her silver-streaked hair. "Everything?" she asked. Jess hesitated. "He told me what you did, how you handled it. I didn't realize... I knew it hurt you, but I didn't know you were that strong." Marlene smiled. "Jess," she said gently, "strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just paperwork and patience." Jess laughed, then went quiet. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I hope one day I can stand up for myself like that." "You already do," Marlene said. "You just haven't had to yet." They talked for another hour about old recipes, new books, or plans to visit. When they hung up, Marlene sat still for a long time. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a mother fighting to keep her place. She felt like a woman her daughter looked up to. 2 days later, Grace invited her to speak at a local women's seminar. "No pressure," she said. "Just a room full of women who've been silenced, minimized, and made to feel disposable. No big deal." Marlene almost declined. "I'm not a speaker," she said. But Grace just smiled. "You don't need a podium. You just need your story." That Saturday, Marlene stood in front of a modest crowd in the community center auditorium. Folding chairs, cold water bottles, and the scent of old carpet filled the air. But the room was full of eyes that knew pain. Women with tight smiles, crossed arms, hidden bruises, some on skin, most on the heart. Marlene took a deep breath and told them everything. Not just about Ethan, not just about Cassidy, but about the quiet unraveling, the days she made dinner for a man who no longer made eye contact, the mornings she woke up early to iron shirts for someone who treated her like background noise, the nights she cried on a bathroom floor because her grief had nowhere else to go. She told them about the house, the deed, the silence that turned into action. "I didn't win because I yelled," she said near the end. "I won because I waited. I wrote things down, I followed the steps. I learned that the law can be a sword if you hold it steady. And most importantly, I stopped asking for closure. I made it myself." When she finished, the room was still. Then someone clapped. Then someone stood. Then someone cried. And a woman in the third row whispered, "Thank you. I thought it was too late for me." Marlene walked off the stage and sat down in the back heart, thudding not from nerves, from purpose. That evening, she lit a candle, this time not for herself, for the women in that room, for the ones still trying to escape, for the ones who needed a map out of the fire. And as she sipped from her mug, she wrote one sentence in a fresh journal. "This isn't a second chapter. This is a new book." 2 months had passed since the house was sold. 2 months since Ethan and Cassidy packed up their curated decor and filtered dreams and walked out of a home that never really belonged to them. Marlene didn't watch them leave. She didn't need to. Some exits don't deserve witnesses. Her new place sat just outside town, a modest condo with wide windows and lemon-colored curtains that danced in the morning breeze. It had 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and a garden view from the balcony. No history in the walls, no memory echoes in the corners. Everything here was hers. Every key, every bill, every quiet moment. And for the first time in years, quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like permission. She saw Ethan one last time by accident. She was picking up tomatoes at the grocery store when she noticed a man slouched on the bench outside the pharmacy, looking like he'd aged a decade in a season. His hair was longer unkempt, shirt wrinkled, posture collapsed inward like a house caving at the center. It was him. He saw her, too, stood quickly brushing crumbs off his jeans like dignity could still be salvaged. "Marlene," he called. She didn't stop walking. He followed her to her car. "I'm not here to fight," he said quickly. I didn't think you had it in you." She raised an eyebrow, unlocking her door. "What exactly didn't I have in me? Boundaries? A lawyer? A backbone?" He shifted shame heavy in his voice. "No, I thought you'd be too tired." That hit differently, because she had been tired. Tired of being invisible, tired of being polite, tired of being someone's shadow in a house she built. But tired is not the same as done. She stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Well, you miscalculated." He nodded, small and defeated. "Cassidy left," he muttered. "Said I embarrassed her. That I ruined everything." "Did you?" she asked. He didn't answer, because he knew. She climbed into her car, closed the door, and didn't look back. That evening, she received a letter in the mail. No return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately slanted, rushed, overly loopy. Cassidy. She opened it without hesitation. The letter was thick with false niceties and covert accusations. "I hope you're well. I never meant to hurt anyone. You ruined 2 lives over 1 mistake. Was it worth it?" Marlene folded the letter neatly, slid it under the nearest coaster on her table. Didn't shred it. Didn't curse. Didn't reply. Because silence now said more than 1,000 words ever could. That week, she returned to the Women's Center. Not to speak this time. To donate. $50,000 anonymously wired directly into the fund. The director later wrote in their newsletter that the donation had helped 3 women file for divorce, 2 escape abusive homes, and 1 gain full custody of her children. No one knew where the money came from. Marlene didn't need them to. She wasn't looking for applause. She was planting a flag where her old self used to hide. One morning, as she sat on her balcony with a fresh cup of tea, her neighbor, an older woman with silver curls and paint-stained hands, stopped to say hello. They talked about herbs and books and local politics. Then the woman said, "You seem like someone who's been through some things, but came out the other side." Marlene smiled, sipping slowly from her mug. It read, "Unbothered, unbent, unbreakable." She tapped it once and said, "It's my favorite souvenir." Later that day, she opened her journal and wrote, "I used to think peace was something given to you. Now I know it's something you build with your bare hands." And that night, as she curled under her quilt, no longer waiting on anyone's return, no longer mourning what never truly loved her, she finally allowed herself to sleep deeply. Because her story wasn't one of revenge. It was a story of return. To herself. To her name. To the life she rebuilt brick by brick without apology. And that's the kind of ending no one can take away.